Last time, we saw Steve Austin, a man broken, fighting for his life. Rudy doing everything he can to save the life of his friend. And Hall, with some diabolical scheme to turn human beings into cybernetic people as himself. What is behind Hall's plan? And what mental shape will Steve Austin be in when he awakens? Let us find out. Welcome back, agents. This time we'll be considering issue 3 of the Bionic Man, entitled, We Can Rebuild Him. So let's get started. Oscar is standing above Steve. Steve? Steve slowly opens his eyes and looks up at Oscar. I made it? Yes, Oscar says, but I can't say the same for the dataless. Just tell him to take it out of my pension, Steve says. How long was I out? 4 weeks, Steve. It was touch and go there for a while, but you're out of the woods now. Then Rudy walks in. 2 days ahead of schedule. I told you this boy was strong. Has he spoken? Oscar says yes, he's already cracked a bad joke. Cracked bad jokes and cracked ribs. I'd have to say Colonel Austin is back to normal. Steve looks over at his arm, and he says, Where's my arm? Rudy says, Steve, you've had a bad crash. No. You've lost your right arm and both of your legs, but you're alive. Steve, you're alive. No. Did you hear Dr. Wells? Oscar says, you're going to live. Why? Steve says. Why didn't you let me die? There's work going on at a secret installation in North Korea, but they have an intruder. One of the soldiers say, It's confirmed, sir. It appears to be a lone figure. Lone? Americans. It's Americans. And he's coming through the fence. Then, the commander says, he dies at the wall. He's punching through the wall, Major. Sound the alarm. At that moment, Hull comes crashing through the wall of the insulation. Knock, knock, he says. Hull stands before the soldiers, ready to attack. They fire some sort of ray beam at him, but it doesn't slow him down. Hull says, I'm going to rip your spine out and strangle you with it. The soldiers hurriedly gets out a weapon they have been working on to try to get it away from Hull. They start firing on him with their machine guns, but the bullets just bounce off. They have no effect. The men now hurriedly take the weapon to a getaway plane. Another drill? Someone asks. Are you deaf? We're under attack. Get this payload out of here and take it to the secondary site. Scuttle it if necessary. Scuttle it? No one must know that our country made this weapon. Its very existence is an act of war. Then the pilot starts the engines of the plane, goes down the runway. But Hull is standing before them. Captain, there's someone standing on the runway. That's his problem. No, wait. He's coming towards us. Hull jumps through the windshield of the plane into the cockpit. He kills the pilot and co-pilot and takes the weapon and stands and watches as the plane explodes. You're next, Goldman. You and that evil bitch. Oscar looks at Margaret and says, No. I don't think I asked for your permission, Oscar, she says. I don't care. I won't let you do this. Let me refresh your memory, Oscar. Colonel Austin's personnel file. He has been in combat twice, Afghanistan and Iraq. He's flown countless test flights and covert missions, and his health is impeccable. was impeccable, Margaret. That man is broken now. We can rebuild him, she says. For what? So you can send him to do your dirty little errands? He has just woken up to a lifetime of misery, and I'm not going to let you play Frankenstein with what's left of his dignity. Oh, he's come too, she says disappointingly. I was hoping to bypass certain situations. He has a fiancée, Margaret. No, he had a fiancée. As of 1100 this morning, Colonel Austin has been reclassified as deceased. So he's dead, at least to the world, and he undergoes surgery next week. That is, if he complies, which I can't see why he wouldn't comply. What choice does he have? He has a right to a normal life, Margaret, Oscar says. Please, the man is a mess. What semblance of normal can he have now? But he's my friend. All the more reason you should support this procedure, Oscar. We'll make him whole again. That much, I promise. You will make him a machine, nothing more. And I won't sit back and watch what happened to Hall happen to Steve. Then get it right this time, Mr. Goldman. And the first step toward that mutually beneficial goal is convincing him that this is exactly what he needs. You have 1 week, so I suggest you get to work. Steve lays quietly in his hospital bed. Then all of a sudden, he jerks the wires that are attached to him. He reaches over and knocks over all the equipment next to his bed, and he falls to the floor. Rudy and the nurses walk in. Jesus, help me get him back up. Turn the machines off, Wells, Austin says. Turn them off now. I don't want this. Let me die. Rudy tells Steve, these machines aren't keeping you alive. You're not on life support anymore. And he has one of the nurses to give him a sedative. Why did you let them pull me from that wreck? Steve says, you sick. Hold him down. So they get him a shot of the sedative, and Steve goes back to sleep. Oscar and Rudy are walking around in D.C., and they're having a conversation. Rudy says he wants to die, which isn't unusual for a patient in his condition, but I'd hope better. He may not have the strong will to live right now, but there's still a fighter deep down inside of him. How much longer you think he could live? Oscar asked Rudy. Well, I say there's a better chance that he lives longer now. You know, he was a test pilot. No matter how good you are, your luck eventually runs out. Well, he isn't going to be a test pilot anytime soon. Oscar asked Rudy, do you have any experience with prosthetics? Of course, Rudy says. You're talking to an ex-combat surgeon. Why do you ask? Are you familiar with the term bionics? You mean outside of comic books, Rudy says. They're reality, says Oscar. I'm talking lifelike artificial limbs, legs, arms, organs, hearts, and eyes. Eyes, Oscar? I'm a doctor, and I'm up on every scientific and medical advancement, and I've never heard of this. No, I'm talking about military science, Rudy. Classified military science. Rudy turns and looks at Oscar. You're O.S.I. Level 12, Oscar says. Listen, Rudy. O.S.I. has been on this for years, decades. We could build a fully functional human being if we so chose. I mean, we can repair the physical bones, tissue, skin, make it look real, even down to the hairs on a knuckle. Then why isn't this in use? Rudy says. If what you're saying is true, we can make cripples walk, help the blind to see, eliminate dialysis. 2 words, Oscar says. Weapons division. It figures, says Rudy. Something that could do the world a great service, and they've already corrupted it. Oscar says, now let's drop the politics for a little bit. We're talking about Steve here. You mean, yes, the works, a complete overhaul. By whose say-so, Oscar? That's classified. But does it really matter, Rudy? It does to me. I'm his physician. Yes, you're his physician. But He's my friend. Oscar and Rudy pause for a moment. And Rudy says, well, in Steve Austin, you do have a prime candidate for partial rehabilitation. Partial, says Oscar. You said he was strong. He is, but he has severe spinal damage. His hips are a mess. Even if he had his legs, they wouldn't be much use to him. Oscar puts his arm around Rudy and says, I can guarantee complete recovery with 4 times the strength, perhaps more. How? How are these things powered? What are they made of? Oh, Rudy, says Oscar, you have to catch up on 50 years' worth of research by tomorrow morning. So Oscar and Rudy present a model before Steve and tell him how they can rebuild him. His legs, his arm. But Steve looks over and he says, who told Jamie? Oscar says, I did that night. Steve says, what did you tell her? Everything. But it doesn't matter now. You can be with her again, as normal as you ever were. Steve says, I had a mole, Rudy, on my right thigh, right under my butt. Jamie looked at it and said it looked like Africa because of the way it was shaped. She called me Biwana, just to be cute. Biwana Beast. I've spent weeks lying here thinking about how she'd never say that again, because there's no mole, there's no leg. And now you tell me that everything can be replaced? Steve picks up the model and throws the arm across the room. This is my grave, he says. Do you hear me? I'm dead. Oscar stands over Steve. Steve, so why don't you respect the memory of a dead man and get out of here? Oscar says, Steve. Get out, Steve says. So Oscar and Rudy turn and walk out the room. And Steve lies there in his bed, looking out the window, silently. At that moment, a nurse walks in. She says, sorry, Colonel Austin, but I have to get your blood pressure and other vitals. And she goes on to talk to Steve. She says, this is going to sound extremely corny, but I feel like I know you. I mean, I know we haven't met or anything, but it was just my brother. He always talked about you. He was a pilot, Air Force, really young. Whenever he'd come home for the holidays, he'd blab on about how great the service was and what he'd be doing. You know how gung-ho kids are when they first enlist, I'd imagine. I was one of those gung-ho kids once, Steve says. Why am I not surprised? Anyway, Brad, my brother, he'd always talk about this Colonel Steve Austin, war hero, astronaut, test pilot. He practically wanted to be you. Anytime he broke a record, I heard about it. When they told me you crashed, my heart sank. For you, of course, but also for Brad and how he'd have taken it. He'd probably go AWOL just to make sure that you were okay. Tell him not to waste his time, Steve says. He's dead, the nurse says. A crash like yours, only not in some superjet. Just some normal landing. F-16 landing on the deck of a carrier. The cable snapped and he rolled. I'm sorry, Steve says. It was years ago. He lost both of his legs in the crash and was in a coma. And he never came out of it. The nurse bends over and picks up the model and puts it back together. My family kept saying that it was probably better that he died, rather than live the rest of his life like that, with no legs. People say some stupid things sometimes just to get over the pain. Maybe it wasn't so stupid, Steve says. It was to me, said the nurse. It used to make me angry. I mean, so he wouldn't walk anymore. That's sad, I know. But Brad was funny. A really funny guy. And you don't need legs to tell a joke. There's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't think about how great it would have been to hear him tell me what record Steve Austin broke today. I miss him. But I'm glad to have met you, Colonel Austin. Finally. But I wish it was under more pleasant circumstances, but I'm still glad. You have a nice evening. Steve stares at the model in front of him. The nurse says, I'm really glad you made it, Colonel Austin. And she walks out. That will do it for issue number 3, my agents. Finally, next issue, we'll see Steve get rebuilt into the form that we know him as. And then, what's going on with Hull? Why did he steal that weapon from the Koreans? More questions that will be answered in the future. So, until next time, let's keep it classified.